Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Improv Network podcast. I really did have a brain fart there.
Did we catch you on surprise or something? Were you cooking or something? Oh, hey, it's showtime. Hey, everybody.
Yeah, oh, shoot. I was doing some writing. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Improv Network podcast. This is a show where we have conversations geared toward building stronger connections throughout the improv community. I'm James Quesada.
And I'm Bob Wick.
And we are your education team for the Improv Network. Y'all can go to theimprovnetwork.org, and I hope you will, to check out all sorts of resource and education stuff there, including blogs and interviews and a dedicated improv FAQ page that has an archive of these conversations, as well as mini lecture videos on improv topics in videos. You can also catch us as a podcast, guys. I don't know if everybody knows this, but you can find the Improv Network podcast on any podcast service. So if you're like, I love watching it,
right?
But what if I could just carry it with me?
Yeah,
like those things.
I don't want to look at Bob and James talking. I just want to hear their sweet, sweet voice. Or you can go directly to the source and go to www.gabbermedia.com and download it. There is a word. There is a word. This is not a podcast about being tech savvy, because I would not co-host that. But if you want to go to www.gabbermedia.com, you can find us there. Plus, and a bunch of other great shows.
Yeah, if you're old school and you want to nab the RSS feed to add to your personal feed, however that works, that's how you do it. If
you're like down with the RSS, that's cool. I got a place for you to get.
In full transparency, part of the reason we're vamping here is because we're also trying to share this to the Improv Network group page. And Bob, were we able to do that?
Yes, we are. Yes, that's the one tech thing I did accomplish today.
Nice.
Boom.
Great. Well, we're going to introduce our guest and get started with the conversation. But before we do, I just want to also mention to our viewing audience that if at any point you want to comment with a question, either on the topic at hand or just add a general question in the improv world into the comments, we will either get to it during the episode or we like to stock up on those questions and then do like a whole episode of like questions that we haven't gotten to. That's always fun. So feel free to jump in with those comments and questions throughout our conversation here. Okay, enough of that. Let's go ahead and enough of us, enough of our bullshit.
All right, podcast dad. Enough of that.
I got to get going. So it's been nice seeing everybody. Our guest for this episode has been performing for 20 years in theater and TV and film. She is an alum of the Second City Hollywood Training Center, where she has been on improv teams of all sorts, including short form and long form and duos. And she has a solo show coming up called I'm Fine. And you can catch that at the Hollywood Fringe Fest. We have a link in the description along with some info on that show if you are in the Hollywood area and you want to check it out. Fantastic. Without further ado, let's bring on our guest. It is Paige Fockler.
Yeah.
Yay.
Hey.
How you doing?
Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks so much for joining. And Paige, the topic that we have for this episode is generally show styles and formats, including show numbers, the differences between doing group teams versus duos versus solo shows. And yeah, we're excited to talk about all that. And do you want to get us started by just like letting us know what you had in mind going into it?
Yeah, sure. You came to me, and I'm always like hesitant to talk about show, not show styles, but like form styles, because I learn in a very particular way, and it's always like people are like, yeah, let's do this style. And I'm like, shit, like I don't remember what that is until you start doing it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like I don't think I could ever teach improv for that very reason, because I can't articulate what those things are. I can only do them. So like it's the reverse. Like if you can't teach, do. Like fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, it gets so confusing too, because as soon as you open up the conversation of forms and show styles, it's like everybody, even like in the same city, one theater to the next,
100%.
calls it something slightly different, or one teacher to the next teaches a little differently, and so it barely does any good to be like, let's do an Armando, or let's do a Laurent or whatever, because we're like, what do we all? Let's all just share what we think that is.
Well, I know what I do when I hear the word Armando. What do you do?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Like I think the only thing I could probably verbalize right off the bat was doing the Onion, and that's only because I really enjoyed doing it. And I think part of that is because I want the stage to myself, so I'm like, oh, I'll go first.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Well, that's cool too, because that has that's a form where well, again, we'll have to compare notes here, but like you start with a solo scene, and then somebody joins and it transforms into a 2-person scene unrelated to the first one.
Right.
And with each new person that you add, it's a new scene. So it is, speaking of like, even numbers and forms, it is like a solo show and a duo show and a group show all wrapped in one.
Right. And then when you get everybody on stage, you start going back, because until you go back all the way down to the solo show. Which I always tell, my favorite thing to do is if I have an impatient student who's just has to talk, I always put them in that spot, and I tell them, wait. What you're gonna end the show with one word. You get one word. So I just want you to wait. And when you can't wait no more, count to 10 and then say your word. And it always works, because you build up, you force them to build tension. And then when we give notes like, well, how did you feel? Did you notice something? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
How did you feel having that one? You get a moment and you didn't have to talk, and you still got that reaction you like, all that positive reinforcement. Your money, buddy.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that.
And so Paige, you said that like you are more of like a jump in and do it. And so are you saying that like you still really like form and those different styles? It's just like you don't keep track of them,
Yeah. I in my personal life, I really like form and function. I like all of these things. So it would only make sense that I would also like form in this particular way, but I don't. The exact opposite. So like I understand form as a guiding tool, as like a suggestion overall. And I'm sure that's incredibly frustrating for the people I'm on teams with. I'm sure that they've told me numerous times, like, could you? But I don't recall.
Like stick to the form.
Yeah.
Like,
when we make them up, when we put this organic thing, you got to stick to the rule.
Yeah.
We were looking for a group game. Yeah.
I think that games with short forms obviously very different. There is like that to me is like my real life. Like those are forms. I understand the games. Let's do the games. And I think why I don't enjoy short form as much. I did it for a long time. You kind of start that way and it's fun. But for me, it felt constricting. But I also was lucky to be on some incredible teams with some incredible people that allowed for my error in not knowing the form as much, bringing back stuff. People were bringing callbacks and things like that I was also doing, but I had once I walk off the stage, I very rarely remember anything that was said. Meanwhile, these people that are verbatim could tell me every single thing that happened in every single scene, and I don't understand that. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm so jealous of those people because, when you get those audience members like, oh my God, remember this line? I do not.
No, I do not.
You said it 10 minutes ago. I must have. I believe you. I'm not calling you a liar. That was up there.
Yeah.
I'm not here now.
Well, so yeah, like how do you work with the balance of that in a team, Paige? Because I guess we're putting it in negative terms, but like you're saying that like the team kind of has to like deal with you breaking the rules or whatever, but on the flip side, you kind of have to deal with everyone else like being too strictly adhering to the rules, or people who are like get too hung up on the details or the restrictions.
I just laughing because I'm specifically remembering like being in the side wings and having someone on the team that is incredibly analytical and like getting mad at the people on the stage, saying we're doing the form is gonna escape the word, but like it's a very UCB form, just Upright Citizens Brigade, the Herald. And so, there's 1A, 1B, 1C, scene, 1, 2B. So I would have people being like, well, that person went out. And I was like, it just doesn't matter. Like at this point, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't know where we're going.
The audience doesn't know.
Yeah, they don't care. And sure, it wasn't flawless, but like, welcome to live improv theater. Get over it. So that's like, I would find very frustrating. So, I mean, I'm sure that they were frustrated with me too, but like, I think the way that I'm not sure that people, when I was on really great teams, that people would be like, oh, Paige does this, just as well as like, I'm not recounting these other people that like perform differently than me. We worked well together because of that. I think, my strength lied in being present, and I didn't let anything go. I picked up every tiny mistake that was made and made a big deal about it. So I think we were able to like really gel in that. They could come on and kind of corral me, so to speak, and kind of bring me back to whatever the form was. And I very, pliable. I'm like, okay, great. Like I'm on board with this. So it was such a nice, when I was on those teams, it was such a nice balance where we were keeping each other in check, but not to a frustrating level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I think, the difference to me, right, is like, I don't know, just putting the people first. Is it like working, because like I'm a very form oriented person, and I love working with form and developing forms, and I'm always thinking of it as like a challenge, right? Is that like, let's see if we can do it. But I've definitely been on teams or in conversations with people who are more like, I don't know, like somewhere along the way, it seems that people can get convinced that like if you're not adhering to like that structure, that you're doing it wrong, and get more and just kind of use it to get frustrated with people. And it's like I don't know, it's like, no matter what, wouldn't it just be better if like you learned why you're so frustrated with somebody, and like or like if you were doing this form with your like absolute best friends, would you still be that mad at them for like, or would you be like, oh, that's that's just Jeff or whatever, you know what I mean? Like you're more forgiving, and it's like, where is this tension coming from? It's very strange to me that how that gets built up for people.
Yeah. And also, like, aren't you doing this to have fun?
Yeah.
I think we forget so often that like, oh, we're doing this because it's fun. I live in Hollywood, so there's such a performance aspect to it that is surface level. Like, oh, someone might come and see the show. And it's like, well, no one's coming to the tiny studio theater at 11 o'clock on a Friday night to see if you're any good for a TV show. Like, move on. Let's have a good time. Yeah, it's so hard when someone's very analytical about scene work.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I think that like there probably was a time, it seems like that's I could be wrong about this, but it seems like there probably was a time when scouts would go see people because maybe like late 90s, early 2000s, when improv was like, on a certain boom, and when there wasn't like so much internet content. And so you did kind of have to like go see live shows in order to see the talent pool. But there's so much online that is probably a bigger and more accurate, thorough representation that like it's unlikely that people are still, to me, that people are still going to check out improv shows for that reason,
But Laura Michael isn't at every show.
Right. I kept looking for him, but
he never shows up.
He never showed up.
And I'm also just thinking that, like, even if it's the case that people are going to see the talent pool at these theaters, that they're probably less looking at the success of the show itself and more at like, does this person seem fun to be around and easy to work with? Like that. Like, is this a person who I would be interested in having a conversation with after the show and feels accessible and nice, and you can feel when people are too uptight during a show about how it's going, or if there's like a little resentful undercurrent of like how you're playing with each other, if you think the other person's doing a good job too.
Oh my God. I just like that he's saying that. I was at a festival with my short form group that we were doing long form, which I like have forced. I was like, can we please just try this? We've been together for so long. And then we ended up doing a show, and the whole time I was so conscious of what was happening and what the audience was reacting. And I was just like, this is terrible. And like, then my fear was like, oh my God, did everybody know? That everybody on my team? Turns out they didn't. They're like, that's the best show we've ever had. And I thought, well, then what do I know? Like, I thought that was not great. And I really thought we were dying.
I like that Susan Messing quote. If I'm not having fun doing this, then I'm the asshole.
Yes. Hey, she's great.
Yep.
She did a workshop that I went to, and I was just like, who is this wonderful woman? Just like golden nugget.
Yeah. She's also somebody, that I think I've asked her about Forum before, because she's so good at doing like callbacks and making connections. And I've asked her like, she's such a big proponent of being in the moment and not thinking about the form, but she does form very well.
Yeah.
And I've asked her well, what are you doing then to still do the form, even though you're just like, fuck everything. And she's like, you just listen, like, you know what you're trying to do, but you don't constantly think about it the whole time. You just like stay in the moment, and things present themselves to you more easily when you do that.
Yeah. 1,000%. And I think, like we were saying earlier, like that's how I can get away with certain things. So like, because I am listening. And I think that's part of the reason I also forget everything the moment I walk off stage. Because I was like, I'm just in this moment, and that's it. That's all that exists here. And just like any other conversation, you usually come back to something like, oh yeah, what was I talking about? So yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's when you have those really great moments where you surprise yourself on stage because nothing's planned. If you're just like listening, reacting, something's going to slip out. And like, I don't know where that came from. That was character speaking. And I love those moments. That's when you start having real fun, because it's like, now I get to kind of be an audience member too and see what happens with this.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's just like, why would you want to like squash that? It's like those are the things that make that can derail the form, but like make the show better regardless. Is like when like, oh, this surprising thing just happened to Bob during the show, and he's like, we want to follow that instead of the form, because we're not like, Bob, this is fire, this is really great, we have this form we got to do, but we'll talk about it afterward, what might have happened,
what could have happened if we weren't doing the stupid form.
This would be great if we didn't. We kind of have a plan here, so we can't really explore this, but it's really great. Like, I like to think about it as like, you're never gonna have a perfect show, right? And that's especially like to me a helpful mentality to go into like a forum with, because it's going to be flawed, and some of the flaws are going to probably be the best parts of it if you let them be. And so it's like, you should look forward to like, how are we going to fuck it up this time, or how is it going to go wrong this time? start with whatever your intention is at the outset, but like look forward to the ways that it's not going to work.
Yeah. I love that.
And so what about like different schools and I don't know, you mentioned like show styles and forms, Paige, but before the show, but also like generally school philosophies. You have some points there too.
I went to Second City all the way through. When I got to LA, agents wanted improv on your background. They wanted you to go to school, and I was like, okay, I'll do it. Like, improv was not my trajectory. I didn't know very much about it. I watched some short form shows, and I was like, great, that's fun. Like, it was not in my zeitgeist. And I only went to Second City was because it had a payment plan. I could pay by the week and had no money. I showed up for the first day, and it changed my entire life.
Wow.
We played this really silly game that like all 4 of the classes that were going on at the same time like met, and then, introduce yourself, and terrible icebreakers, which I could just do without. But we played this game of like rock, paper, scissors. And so you were next to someone, and whoever won in those couples went on to the inner circle. And then you went on until you only had 2 people. And I was one of the last 2 people, which normally would be my nightmare. I want to come in and say my name, like I said, and like sit in the corner. You remember me or you don't.
Yeah.
And it ended up being in the middle of like 50 people that I don't know in a city I've been in for 3 weeks. And then I won. And so it was all about like, every time someone else won, you cheered everybody else on. Everybody was being a cheerleader. So I'm in the middle of this group. I mean, literally, there's just me and this other person, and then 60 people around us. And I won, and then everyone's celebrating me. And it was one of those things that just magically, I was like, I'm at the right place. And I don't think that happens at other schools. Second City in particular, what I think they do is create good actors that can improvise. Whereas UCB is all about game. And why I think maybe I wasn't attracted to UCB. They obviously produce great performers and great comedians. And I think sometimes you have the nuggets of people that are really good, solid, all-around actors. And I don't mean that you being a comedian doesn't make you a great actor. It's just you're coming about it in a different way.
Yeah.
And then IO was similar to Second City. It was kind of the in-between. Improv Olympics was in between the 2 of those, which I really loved, and then they shut down. And then you have Groundlings, which is its own school, and it's sketch-based. Their improvising is very formulated. And like, I had so many friends go through it and like get all the way to the writing lab and stuff like that, which is like, it's a fairly prestigious thing, especially in LA, because that's where people are pulling actors from to be on shows and in commercials and stuff. That was the leading thing before the pandemic. But it was formulated and it was specific, and I'd go see shows and you'd be in the middle of improv, and the teacher or the coach is the one that was calling the shots. They're out in the audience, they're on the side, they're clapping, pulling people aside, which I find incredibly disruptive. There was another theater called the Clubhouse in LA that like was just when you're in your early 20s and you like really love music and you're like, and you don't really have to have a serious job, you get to just hang out with your friends at the coffee shop. Like, that's what the Clubhouse was. It was perfection.
Oh, the name says it all.
Yeah.
So you got to like watch all of these groups from all of these schools. And then there was some other offshoot, like the Nerdist and some other smaller ones that in LA. I can only really speak to Los Angeles, but they would.
Well, yeah, there's a ton there. That's a pretty strong cross section of styles. Yeah.
So this was such a perfect place because a lot of the retention went out. It was just like, this is where we're having fun, And I did a show on Saturday nights with my duo partner, and however many people you brought is how many minutes you got. And so it was interesting. Wow. It became really like too obnoxious. I had a 30-second set one time, and I was like, "This is."
Because you brought half a person.
This is ridiculous. We brought 5 people, but he overbooked. Whatever.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I brought a child.
That's a whole other show. But we got to watch all these different improv teams. And when I first was starting out, and there were people from Groundlings, and all of a sudden people are clapping in the middle of the scenes, just to wipe the scene, and it, for me, it's like, okay, well, now I'm out. Now I have to reset and like get invested in what you're doing again. And now it's 2 minutes into the scene and now it's over, so that worked for some people, but I just felt like as a visual, as a show, it didn't seem enjoyable to do. But everybody's different. And that's why there's all those schools. I just felt like Second City was always just my jam. And for lack of a better term, like the best. But obviously the best in this lane.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine it's very, what are, like, is the vibe at a place like it's the Clubhouse?
Yeah.
Are people like, does it still seem kind of like offstandish with each other of like, oh, there's a Groundlings. Or did it seem a little bit
theater
like
just walked in. Watch out.
It was certainly, I mean, you're talking about a bunch of comedians that are one step below stand-up comedians, right? So like we're not super pretentious because it's not all about us, so to speak. But there's certainly a ton of people that it is all about them. Yep. So that's where the pretension lied of the like, if you were constantly winning, shows or you got featured a lot more, then there's like this pretend celebrity status, which is fabulous and everyone should experience that. Like I'm not against that, don't let it go to your head, but let's celebrate everybody. And if they win a tournament on a Saturday night at midnight, then congratulations. But there's not a lot of championing and cheerleading. So it becomes cliquey in the way that like, oh, we're from UCB, oh, we're from Second City and things like that. Mm-hmm. But there are obviously a couple, schools or groups that did think that they were coming from the place that was the best, which I get, loyalty.
Yeah. You just got me thinking about like, it's just got to come from a sense of tribalism, right? That's really what it is. And like, it's just so, I love the exercise you're talking about with the rock, paper, scissors, because, when you started describing it in my head, I just thought it was funny. I was like, that's risky to like start a improv class with like, okay, we're going to do a knockout competition.
Yeah.
But the difference is, and it's amazing, and I can't wait to like use it because
I was thinking the same thing.
is that you have to cheer for each other, and it's like it's like, what are we doing? Like we're rock, paper, scissoring, somebody's gonna win, like, and who cares?
And what do they win?
Yeah.
What is this golden goose you receive for being the best at rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah. And it's a pretty even playing field, and isn't it fun when like somebody by mostly probably luck and good guessing wins? And so can't we just all like cheer and get behind that? And that to me is like, I'm in the New York community, so it's like I get that like competitiveness, especially with career and professional goals, but like there's so much luck involved in that too. And so why can't we just like celebrate more when somebody just like gets lucky enough to get a break, or just like not be mad at each other for going toward our similar goals, whether they're artistic or career ambitions. Why can't we just be like, great, like, and I hope you get it your way. If I did it that way, it probably wouldn't work for me, but I'm gonna try to do it this way. And I let's support each other just like across the path.
100%. You're in New York. How long have you been there?
4 years.
4 years. What's that like? That scene is different but similar.
Yeah, there's the UCB theaters out here closed over the pandemic, so it's for a lot of reasons. It's a much different landscape. A lot of the theaters got hit, like as many places, but so it's actually interesting as it's coming back, because I'm gonna, now that I'm on this train of thought, I'm gonna talk about that for a second. Is that what's interesting is that, like, okay, well, there's kind of like a scattering and reassembling, and there's like Squirrel is an improv company that is some old Herald team players that are starting to do shows at a place called Caveat, and it's like that kind of like that to me seems like a place where like, okay, now all these people who had maybe problems or apprehensions with like other theaters are kind of like coming and being like, you guys want to be friends?
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool to see. I think before the pandemic, there's a little bit of like the UCB is more of like a career ambition path. And then there's Magnet Theater, which is much more, I guess, by reputation and by my observation, is more like a clubhouse and just people who do it for the love of the art of it and are more theatrical or acting geared. And then there's the Pit, the People's Improv Theater, which I was really attracted to because they do everything. And the the positive and negative of it is that you see some of the coolest, most innovative stuff and top improvisers playing there, and you see some of the biggest disasters there. You know what I mean? Like the scale of, but it's huge. It's a huge roll of the dice to go see a show because it could be anything, but it's so much more about like self-produced and like community produced stuff where they have so much. Well, they had to shut down their two big stages, but they were offering up all this stage time for people to hopefully like build opportunities for people to produce their ideas and stuff. And so I found that really interesting. But yeah, again, there's just like, there's some of that comes along with stigma where people are like, yeah, I went to go see a Pit show and it sucked.
Yeah.
And it's like you're probably not going to walk away from a Magnet or an UCB show saying that because it's more curated. But like that's an unfair stigma to put on people for just like trying and and then it gets mucky with groups.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like watching student shows. You're going to see some bad stuff because people are still getting comfortable with the stage. They're going to make mistakes. But sometimes you see the best fucking things on there because people make moves because they haven't conditioned themselves to, there's a rule, I can't do this. They don't know. So they do it. And it's like, that just gave me permission to do that as well. I can't believe I had a thought that I wasn't allowed to do things. That there's rules of making make-believe. So I get annoyed at myself because I should know better after 15 years. But then I'm like, oh, God bless this person. That was amazing. I love it. I love the choice. I love it. Or when you see someone get that spark, like, and now it's going to be easier for them after this because they had a realization on stage. So yeah, I agree with you. Curated stuff is great and consistent, but I still will go to I don't know, lack of better terms, air quotes for those watching listening on the RSS feed, the clubhouse or the fun theaters or the hangout ones.
Well, how's the theater or the community where you're at? That's very specific.
Well, we have the Planet Ant, which is the oldest theater, which was started by a group of Second City main stagers like Keegan-Michael Key and the Funks and Larry Joe Campbell and Nancy Hayden and Margaret Atowski and those guys, which it's just kept on growing. Like especially the last 5 years has really grown. And that's always a great place to hang out. You know what? In Detroit, there's 3 great theaters, and they're all I pretty much stick to Go just because I live closer to it. But it's like they're all hangouts, but they all hang out in a different way.
Yeah, I love being there.
Yeah, so I think if there's any of that, that's a Planet Ant person or a Go comedy person or a Pointless person, it's probably from a student who's trying to push that agenda. Sure. And not so much someone like me who's been doing it for so long, like I can go play over there if I want to. I can pretty much do what I within reason. Go hang out. That's what I like to do. To me, it's play. It doesn't pay my bills. It doesn't, do anything for me other than gives me joy. So I'm going to keep it that way. As long as they keep the bar open, I'll show up.
Yeah. I know that community was so so special.
I thought you say so drunk. Yeah, right.
Well, that too. I'm not going to that. I know you asked if I knew James, and I was like, oh man, if I met him during Diff, I don't know. But because it's a smaller community, and because there's so much fun, and it's just like, oh, thank goodness, like what a safe haven this is, and all the like being on stage, and like some of those theaters are theaters, you know, of an instructor of mine, Jamie Moyer, improv goddess.
She was actually my first instructor too. Yeah.
She, you know, her mom owned a stage there, and I got to perform on that. And I thought, like, this was such a magical place, because not only was it filled with improvisers and funny people, but it was also a theater. So it was just like, you know, how you feel when you step on a stage that's meant for performing, and it's just like fantastical, and like you're at home. And that's just how I felt walking around in Detroit to all of that. So lucky you.
It's very interesting the difference between when a city has that like industry in the mix, you know, with LA, New York, Chicago. There are really great communities like Detroit or Portland, DC, Atlanta, that have like really, really awesome improv communities, and that have been like growing just as much as anywhere, and doing really great shows and like legendary teams, and you know, but it's like, for the most part, you're either, you know, you might be thinking about moving somewhere else, or I know in Detroit there are agencies that people can flock to get commercial and film work. But it's not really the thing that's on people's minds. So like you can rely more on everybody just doing it for the love of it a little bit more.
Yeah. I can almost guarantee no one signed up for an improv class because their agent told them to. You know?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, sure it happens, but that's rare.
And I think that there's room for everything, right? And like whether you're doing it for the love of it, or like to chase career goals, or whether you're more acting driven, short form, long form. We've talked on here not too long ago about like Bob and I enjoy going like meta. And there are people, some people hate that, don't want to be around it, don't want to see it, don't want to like talk about it or fuel the fire for it. Like, and it's like, well, I think it's good to know what is for you and what isn't for you, but like not to be mad at each other for having different interests and inspirations and things that like satisfy you about this very big umbrella of improv that like, again, we tend to like get convinced somehow it is much more narrow than it really is. Let's talk about the differences between like the numbers, because your duo is Beth, Paige, and you also have this solo show coming up. So like, how does things change?
Onion.
You're
my only onion.
That's how much you love the onion. It's like your life. It's your mantra.
I sliced everybody else away.
Yeah.
No. So I was part of Beth. Like I said, we haven't performed in a few years. We were on an improv team together, a short form improv team. And I couldn't tell you what the conversation was that like, hey, let's try this together. I'm sure she was like, yeah, let's do this, you and me. And I was like, oh, okay. I like playing with you. And I found so much more freedom when it was just two people. Obviously a lot of freedom when it's just one person. I would have a lot of people that I was on teams with that were terrified about being there out alone. And when people would be like, I can't believe you just left me out there. And I was like, well, I didn't leave you out to dry. Like you haven't we've created this world together, and we aren't always together in a world, you know? So for me, I just thought like, oh, well, I think that sounds awesome. Why don't you leave me out here all alone? Because to me, it was like that little kid playing by themselves, and like that freedom that you feel And I guess it's terrifying. There are moments you come to the realization all of a sudden, like, oh my God, I'm out on the stage by myself and there's 20 people just staring at me, waiting for me to be funny. And that's obviously dangerous. Like, right. Like, I'm supposed to be funny. And it's
this
like,
better be good.
Yeah.
I'm out here by myself.
You got the spotlight. It's a big chance, kid.
And I think that's what everybody else thinks too. They're like, oh, like there's all this pressure, but for me, that's less pressure. I don't have to have a conversation with somebody. I don't have to like listen really. Like I only have my brain to listen to, and like that's an endless cycle of stuff that's going to come out, right?
Yeah.
So for me, and I think I've always been very independent. So that's just me living my life out on stage. Like I've always had to figure out stuff on my own, not had to, but like because of massive social anxiety, like I in fear of like getting something wrong and being perfect. I just was like, well, I'll do it by myself. So it was just a natural thing for me to also enjoy that. And I didn't understand why people didn't want to do it also. I was like, but this is joy. Then turns out people like communicating with other people and connecting with people. Mm-hmm. And so like, I got that too. I was like, oh, okay. It took me a long time. It took me doing stuff by myself on stage to realize like, oh, I understand the attraction to having these connections with other people. Yeah. Having just one other person was also really cool because of that. Like I went backwards. I started on a team, went to 2, went to 1, then was like, oh, great. What a great like building block backwards. That I think made me stronger in general, but like working off just one other person, especially when they're like-minded. Mm-hmm. Liz Rachel was the other part of Beth, and she's brilliant. She's an incredible performer. And we were so like-minded, but so very different in such a complimentary way. But also like we would both get frustrated with each other. And that was a cool thing to like be able to pinpoint. You're in a group and you're like, I don't know if I know exactly what's going wrong here. Like if we're stepping back and the coach is going to tell us, I'm like, I guess it was this person's quote unquote, air quotes, fault for this. But it's harder to pinpoint, but when it's just two of you, there's an obvious reason why something didn't work. So it's easier to navigate. So then going back to a group setting, it's like, okay, great. I know why this didn't work. And it's not like you fix something, right? Like you just understand
I disagree because
okay.
You with all due respect, because you do learn that thing like, it might be quote unquote their fault, but you have to have 2 conversations, one with them and one with yourself. Is it their fault? And why am I mad? And it's kind of like in real life and real relationships. If you can't be alone with yourself, how are you going to be with somebody else? And that applies to bigger and bigger groups. So I think you do learn something. Okay.
Yeah. I like that.
I think
that makes sense to me.
I think what maybe Paige, what you're saying though, is that like you learn to talk in if you can find somebody like-minded to work with like that, you learn to talk in certain terms that you can not put under a microscope, right? Like, because I agree with what you're saying, Bob, but I think that like if you're
James,
working with somebody,
I'm sorry, Paige.
I'll step out.
Yeah, let's get out.
Do you know like? Does that track kind of with what you're saying, Paige? Is that like you stop thinking about like the terms that you're putting it in, and you can just kind of like be a little bit more connected with somebody where you phrase it things certain ways, but it doesn't matter like what you mean in a larger or more nuanced sense. It's just like you're speaking the same language, so you can kind of like figure it out together easier than with like 8 people thinking about like the idea of like we made a mistake, a group of 8 people are going to think about that idea in different ways, whereas like if you find a partner to work with, you can say like, oh, what was our mistake there, and not have worrying about each other being like, well, what do you mean by mistake?
My bad, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about being analytical and like, oh, we're doing the 2-person Herald and we were on 2B and you went to 2C. Jeez.
Well, it's kind of a melding though. Like yes and no to both of those things. It is like that what I'm saying is that like having that duo is like what James is saying is like, it is nice because you understand, because in that someone is saying what's quote unquote right or wrong, you know, it's what works, what didn't work. And then going back to a group setting, and then what Bob was saying, like understanding, like that's the best way I could put into being able to verbalize what's going on in a group setting. Like I said earlier, like I have a very difficult time. So like the track of going from group to 2 to 1, back to 2 to group, like that's where I learned more like I was able to use terminology that I wasn't able to use before, and barely now, but you know, most of my stuff is intuitive and it's like, okay, I understand. I just understand because my brain is constantly going. So I'm watching everybody do everything. So for me, I'm gathering all this information and it plays out. Whereas I couldn't gather all this information and then write it all down. I can use it immediately. And I think that that's such a nice, like I found an outlet and a use for my brain always going.
Yeah. If I can just piggyback on it, because I've only seen you play a couple times, and that's what I noticed about your style. Like you are high energy, but it's controlled. Is that something you had to learn, or is that from your acting background, or is that just like how did you learn how to do that, or is that natural?
I think it's natural. I think that a lot of things in my life, and yes, I think having theater training from the get-go when I was in college, and like understanding the love of that, and like I'm sure like I stepped away from acting for a long time. I did some other stuff, and so like having to merge like that initial training then with freedom. Like just what you said. Thank you so much. That's incredibly kind observation. But I think a lot of it's natural, and because like I want to be perfect, but I also want to have fun. And this just I was able to find an outlet that allowed me to do so. And you know, someone said, here you go, be you. You know, on stage. So like, and I think that that's part of the reason, like I was saying earlier, like once I'm on stage, this magic happens and I come off stage, I don't remember anything because, you know, because now I have to be in the real world. I have to protect myself. I have to put guards up. I have to, you know, I may be funny, but I'm making jokes to like, let's build that wall higher and further away from me. So like, you can see me as one thing, but you don't actually get to know me. Whereas on stage, it's vulnerable. So of course I don't want to, you know, at the core, like, isn't that who you are? I mean, not everybody, but like on stage, isn't that like, that's the joy of that fourth wall, you know, that's built in, that you get to just be yourself. Right. So yeah, I guess it's just, I just went around in circles answering that question, but I think that most of it's normal.
Yeah. But I also like to say, like, by controlled, I don't mean like suppressed. Is that because we've talked to many improvisers who are high energy improvisers who've gotten that note, like, oh, you gotta bring it back in. You gotta, you know, you're being too much of a showboat or whatever, for lack of a better term, crappy note that is. I don't like that note, so I'll shit on it all day. Yeah. Hey,
I agree with that note.
I want you to play, but be quiet. You know, like fuck that, and play, you know.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance.
I know, and because I've worked with people that are that, like you say, you don't want to give that note, but like there are plenty of times I wanted the coach to be like, can you please give a note to this guy that's going on stage and like doing a song and dance routine? Like that's ruining the entire show, and that's really like when Keegan-Michael Key and what is the improv movie? Don't Think Twice. You know, I've been on stages with those performers, and it's like, can someone tell them to stop? But coaches don't, and that was always really aggravating.
I agree. I would say work on your give and take, not your energy.
Perfect. Yeah.
I'll meet you halfway.
Yeah.
I like what you're saying about the things you gain from being in a duo or solo show, and the way that it can like kind of strengthen your sense of your own style and strengths. And then I'm also wondering, speaking of the solo show, you have coming up Is that something you developed through improv or has any, it's fully scripted, right?
No.
It's not. Okay.
So I wanted to do a solo show for years and years, and I wanted to talk about living with depression and go into that. And I just could never find a good time for that. And then I was just like, well, let's just submit it for a show and then we'll figure it out.
Wow. I love that.
It was terrifying. At the times I was just like, no, I pull out. I don't want to do this. And then like, the office, I have a friend that worked in the office at Second City, was like, you don't have to do the show. And I was like, don't give me an out. Otherwise I'll just be like, okay, you're right. Thank you so much. So I was like, I wanted to write a scripted show. I wanted a 45-minute show. It is what it was. I started with, there's like quizzes online that you can take to figure out if you're depressed or not. So I went through those and answered them all as monologues. And I was like, great, I'll just go like, this is the format I'll use. I have this highly scripted show. It'll be great, right? I've done so much writing all by myself in a room. I didn't have a director. I didn't have a producer. I had no help because I need to do everything by myself because I was too afraid to ask anybody else for help, and that would make me vulnerable. And like, I don't think I could do that. So I'm just like sitting alone in a room, writing all this with like, but I'm just living it in my head. And like the realization that like, I have to go out on stage has not set in until a week and a half before my show. I went to go see someone else's solo show. And I was like, I was certainly terrified. And then the realization of like, oh, that's going to be me next week. Like everything I wrote was crap. I hate it all. I'd written a song. I just like I said, it was page after page, and it's just nothing but like, not like, just if you saw it as an actor that had to go in for something, be like, oh my, like, this is too much. This is too much. Are you crazy? I have to do this on stage all by myself. Like, get the fuck out of here. Sorry if I can't cuss.
No, I've cussed many times.
Okay, great. I've restrained myself. And so I came home in just tears. My roommate was like, what's wrong? And I was like, this is absurd. I cannot do this. I can't. What I've written is garbage. And then the next morning I woke up with a concept out of that, and I scrapped everything I'd written.
Nice.
Wow.
Then I just wrote beats. I have 5 beats for the show. I have a couple things in each beat that I have to hit. But other than that, it's totally improvised. So it is written, but it's not like I can't give someone a script. I'm supposed to do like you're supposed to give a script to someone doing lights. And I was like, man, I don't know.
Just give me it.
Yeah, I just wrote like on a piece of paper. I was like, there was only 3 cues, so it was fine. Yeah. I was like, there's the light cue. This is another one, and then I need you to say this. But that's it. I was like, and I just wrote like that. I'll say this at some point in the scene. So then I just need you to pay attention. Which I'm sure the light person was like, this is both great and aggravating because now I have to pay attention.
Thanks, Paige. Now I can have that cigarette break during the third act like I always do.
Yeah. There is no break. They just have to like, we're flying by the seat of our pants here. That's like, awesome. I just need you to pay attention. And then I wrote out a beat sheet, but like, it's different, not everybody understands what that is. And so it was one of those things that like right before, of course, I go on stage, like it was just silent in my brain. And I wasn't like some other solo performers that thought like have said right before I went on stage, I thought I was going to throw up. And I thought, no, I'm not going to walk out. Like, I'll just cancel the show. And like, by the time I'd gotten to that point, I was like, well, I can't, I don't have an option. So like, let's do this. And it ended up being just the best experience I've ever had. And also terrifying. And like talking about it afterwards, it was received very well. And like people like, oh, I can't believe you wrote that. And then I was like, no, this is my process. And so many other performers were like, nah, no, thank you. That sounds just like the pits. But for me, having all that scripted thing, which I used to be very good at, it was quick. I could memorize quickly, but I didn't comprehend what I was memorizing. And so I think that by eliminating that, I was able to, again, like be present into what was happening on stage and not that the theater is small and that they're very close to you, and to not pay attention to any of them was a whole nother challenge. And then when I'm doing it in August, the theater is 18 people. You know, it's tiny. It is a rehearsal type of space. And I'm like, part of me is like, that's too close to people.
That's intimate. That's very
there's
intimate.
no separation.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a theater in the round, because they like at some point they add seats that kind of go up on the stage. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to fare well with that. So we'll see what that will be.
Just hug that back wall.
Yeah. People are so like stuck to.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I love hearing that, because I think that it's such an interesting world that is less explored in the improv and sketch domain, which is like, you're kind of saying it in one sense that you wrote the show so well that you dismantled it, and like you didn't need the script anymore. And you know, so there's that kind of process where you can kind of like write something and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it and just be like, I'm trying to come up with the perfect script, and then eventually just throw it out because you know what you want to say enough to just like go do it without a script. And then there's also the process of like improvising and re-improvising and never writing anything down and just performing it enough to being like, I could write it down, but I just haven't. You know, and I feel like that's something that maybe used to happen in like older school. Like if you listen to like Abbott and Costello do like Who's On First or any of their routines, there's like recordings of them. You can tell, you get like that, like they just know the gag of Who's On First and the different player names, and it goes in different directions, and they can just like meander within it until they eventually get to like the landing or whatever. So I think that's like such a fascinating world that I would love to explore more myself as in creative process and see more of. So I'm jealous that I won't be able to catch the show in person.
Thank you. But that also, like you saying that goes to speaking about creating characters. And I think the only way, like what you just described, is creating a character, right? Like I physically wrote all these things down, and you learn in improv to very quickly, like pinpoint some things. But like the only reason I was able to do it is just like you said, like I wrote all this stuff down. I created this character in my head, and then I could throw out the script. I didn't need it anymore because I had created a character that was was helpful. That was a version of me, and it was a story about my life. But B, I was able to stay in that character for 45 minutes because I knew everything about her.
Right.
And like, that's important to improv. That's that makes it compelling. And that's what makes it easy to be on stage, is creating a character and listening. Like that, then you don't have to worry about anything. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. I also liked how you didn't give yourself an out. Because I truly believe like we lose so much art, so much creativity because the artist got scared.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to get scared. And we got so many judges on the exterior and one on the interior that just stops us from doing stuff. When people ask you, like, how do you write a show like this? Or how you keep on putting one foot in front of the other? Do you have advice that you usually give, or what would you say about that?
Interesting. I don't know, because I'm kind of hard on myself and a little bit of perfectionist. So like the idea, I have failed before. I have not given 100% to something that I had to put on stage, and it felt awful. And it was far worse than me giving 100, because I could go back and say, well, I didn't give it my all, so of course it sucked. And it's like, correct, you are correct. It did suck. But whose fault is that? That's your fault because you gave half-ass. Like this time, I gave 100%. I gave 110%, and it was terrifying, and it was very vulnerable to put yourself out there like that. And it seems kind of cliche, but you just have to do it. You have to do it regardless of what you think the outcome is going to be, because I think that kills art too. It's like, well, I want to be good. I want to go on stage, and I want to come out there, because this is always like my thought in improv. I'm like, I'm going to go out stage and be like, this is me. And like, everyone's going to go, Congratulations. Way to go, Paige.
It's a good starting point, though.
Yeah. Which always in my head, they were like, Paige, don't go on stage first. We don't need to see that show 500 times. And I was like, that's a fair point. I wish I could say I was joking, but constantly like, we are really back in. But I had to, for the first time, think, oh, it's not about just like on stage, it's about being present in this moment. And creating it I was doing this for myself. I wanted to tell my story because I wanted to tell my story. And I had to get over the fact that I felt like it was selfish. I felt like here I am boasting about my life. And then afterwards, someone coming up and I told them the same thing. I was like, I felt selfish. She's like, no. What you did in there was a gift because you gave all of yourself to other human beings. And that's beautiful, no matter what it is. So I just got like really excited. But I want to tell people, like, you just have to do it for the sake of love of doing it. And then everything else takes care of itself. People are going to hate your shit all of the time. People suck and they hate your shit because they don't have the balls to do it themselves.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a huge difference between sharing and boasting, you know?
Yeah. And I had to learn that. Like, I'm 38 and it took me 38 years to really understand that. Like, it's just being confident feels, what is the word I'm looking? There's like a saying that like being confident finally feels like you're bragging. And it's like, no, like, shouldn't we all be confident? Wouldn't it be lovely if everyone was? Like, it'd be obnoxious and amazing, you know? So yeah, you just like, if I had to pinpoint, my advice is just do it for yourself and everything else just falls silent, you know?
Yes.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Yes, that's a great point to leave it on. And Paige, thanks again so much for joining us. Again, those dates start August 10th with the Hollywood Fringe Festival, right?
Yeah.
And there are 5 show dates in August. And that info is in the description here on Facebook and on our Improv FAQ YouTube channel. And you can also catch it. We'll make sure to include it in the podcast, in that RSS feed as well.
Yeah, RSS, baby.
Well, yeah, great conversation.
Thank you all so much. This was so fun. Thank you, guys.
It was a pleasure having you.
All right, bye, y'all. We'll catch you next time on